Hey everyone, and welcome to the Sunny Go One Piece podcast. On this episode, we're going to be getting into episodes 417 through 419, which will be manga chapters 522 and 523. So just a very small selection of chapters covered in this. But yeah, we bid farewell to our short but very eventful stop at Amazon Lily, while we also get to catch up on what happened to half of the other Straw Hat members. So synopsis, Hancock's illness, quote-unquote, turns out to be love sickness from falling hard for Luffy. Because of this newfound love for Luffy, she agrees to answer the Marine's call and offers to help Luffy get into Impel Down to save Ace. Meanwhile, we get to see what happened to Nami, Frankie, Chopper, and Sanji after being sent off to who knows where by Kuma. Alright, so differences. There are a decent number of differences here, mostly just to extend time because, again, this covers so few chapters. But, yeah, first off, the beginning of episode 418, that whole thing with Hancock imagining her relationship with Luffy is added for the anime. There is scenes similar to that, but not this exact scene. We'll see various other scenes of Hancock kind of interacting with Luffy as they're journey to Impel Downs is documented. And then a lot of the changes that happened in these episodes mostly happens with the extensions of each of the Straw Hats catch-ups. So not ketchup as in the condiment, but catch up, like catching up. Yeah, so first off, with Nami, the whole middle section where she kind of has her cleaning up with in the shower, as well as her battling the storm with the combination of the wind rope and the her climb attack, that's all added. In the manga, it goes from her being sent, figuring out where she is, and then she gets demonstrated the wind rope, and then immediately when she steps out of the wizard's house, that's when she notices that they're on a sky island, and that's basically it. So all that middle section was added for the anime. And then next we get Frankie. Pretty much everything up to where they do the dance is in the manga. Anything after that, so basically when they take Frankie after he's frozen to the hospital, that's all added for the anime. And so next we have Chopper. So Chopper is actually completely out of order. So in the anime, he is the third one, obviously, after Nami and Frankie. But in the manga, Chopper is highlighted 7th. And in regards to his story, there are quite a few changes as well. So Chopper's story in the manga, all you really see is Chopper being kind of rolled off the nest after waking up from the battle, and he's looked on by these two massive birds, and he falls off the nest, falling onto a bush, and then the natives find him there, wanting to take him and make stew out of him, and that's where the story ends in the manga. So all that stuff with the dream at the beginning, and then the birds kind of like playing with him and tossing him around, as well as Chopper kind of wandering around the forest, foraging for possible food, and then finally the natives actually taking Chopper back to their village and trying to boil him. Those were all added for the anime. Now those stuff actually do happen. They're referred to in the later sections, because this whole story of what happens to each Straw Hat member is told through various different means, whether it's more scenes throughout the actual main story. There is also a few cover story panels that go along with this that add a little bit more context to what's happening to them as well. And then the final member that we could see in this set of episodes, at least, is Sanji. Now, his is almost entirely created for the anime. This is almost entirely filler. And literally the only thing that's actually in the manga from this portion of his story is the final moments of the episode where he's being chased on the beach. And he's got that like terrified looking face as he's running away from all the trans women. And yeah, that's pretty much it. With the differences out of the way, let's get into the episodes themselves. So, picking up where we left off with Hancock suffering from her mystery illness, but just after a few minutes, it starts to become pretty clear what is happening here. But I love this whole scene that it's played completely straight, even though we and Young Granny kind of know what's up. Although, once Young Granny starts to test her theory, it goes straight to over the top as Hancock kind of writhes in pain at the mere mention of tomorrow morning. And it gets even worse as all she has to do is say the first syllable in both Luffy's names, as in she gets out mo for monkey and then Lu as in Luffy. And she's just like going nuts. And I do find that pretty funny. I like how it goes from that straight, like, oh my God, she's like dying, to just ridiculous over the top love. But by now it's pretty evident that she's just madly in love with Luffy and is suffering from being lovesick. So even though she looks like she's completely incapacitated, she just gets right back up when she learns Luffy needs to speak with her. And the turn to complete comedy here is pretty entertaining, as Mary and Sonia and young Granny are all in utter shock at how willing she is to help Luffy, considering how cold she is generally. So yeah, let's talk about Hancock falling in love with Luffy for a minute here, because I alluded to this topic in the last podcast episode, how in shonen manga and anime, many female characters are kind of relegated to being nothing more than either eye candy or the love interest for the main male protagonist. Now, I've already spoken about the former subject, but now that it's revealed that Hancock is in love with Luffy, we should kind of take a look at whether she'll be in danger of falling into this storytelling trap of being solely Luffy's love interest. And based on what we see in this episode, and also from what I know of her character later on in the story, and I'll try and keep it vague to not be so, to avoid spoilers, but I'd say yes and no. It's kind of both. I'd say she's not defined by her love for Luffy. She still has her own character, and she doesn't necessarily change her character traits because of Luffy. She's still seen very cold towards everyone else, and still, even to this day, still kicks puppies and baby seals, as we'll see later in the episode. But clearly from here on out, one of her defining character traits is her over-the-top love for Luffy. However, the love isn't really the point of it, as it's more used for comedy, juxtaposed to her coldness towards everyone else. So it's funny when you see her like incredibly cold towards everybody else and mean, and then literally in the blink of an eye, she'll make this special exception for Luffy, and she'll get all really like schoolgirl like and like very cutesy and in a very exaggerated way. And it is pretty funny when she does that flipping of the two, or like she'll be like very kind and loving towards Luffy, and then as soon as somebody else speaks to her, she'll just flip that switch and go back to like being very mean and cold. Those moments are actually pretty funny, I think. And so I think in that regard, like her love for Luffy isn't played for the fact that she's going to be Luffy's like love interest, but more so a source of comedy, I think. Whether that's good or bad, I'll leave that up to you. I think the main reason why I don't think the love interest issue doesn't necessarily apply as much to Hancock is because, first off, she's not physically with Luffy all that often, unlike some of the other female protagonists and female characters from other series. And therefore, she doesn't display these moments nearly as much. Also, she has her own goals and motivations apart from just loving and being with Luffy. Like, that's not her main objective, really. Like, it's still first and foremost being a powerful pirate to the point where she can protect Amazon Lily and her subjects. And that is and always will be her primary duty. And so, yeah, her being the captain of the Kuja Pirates, she has to go out in search of supplies and resources to support Amazon Lily as well. And so all those duties are pretty much her primary motivations and goals. And Luffy, while Luffy is now a very important part of her life, it's not one that completely drives her character. She has her own story apart from Luffy, and her love for Luffy is just one small aspect of her character. Also, seeing as how Luffy has no interest in reciprocating this love, the romance will never actually develop, nor is it actually given much time outside of being used as a punchline. So, yeah, that's also not really going to be a thing. And sure, some people will say it's rather sexist to make one of the strongest female rival pirates fall in love with the protagonist in a rather desperate way at that. But really, from a character standpoint, I think it makes sense because it really informs you about her character. Because think about it, all her life, she's only ever known vile and evil men who have only wanted her for her beauty, her power, or what she can offer them, or just complete evil in terms of the celestial dragons and enslaving her. And that's been the case with the celestial dragons, and we saw that with the world government as a Shibukai. They only want to use her for her power and influence, as well as Marines, as we saw with Momonga. The only reason why he's there is to call her back so that they can use her to fight Whitebeard. And even her own citizens only see her for her beauty. They don't know and or are unwilling to see past that beauty to the real her, which is why they forgive all the mean, cold, and terrible things she's done, because they can't get mad at her because they don't really see past her beauty. They see her beauty and be like, all will be forgiven. And of course, this has led to kind of an overinflated ego and sense of entitlement. But I think anyone would let that get to their head if you too grew up as a slave, but then came upon, all this power and influence and, love. But then here comes Luffy, who not only on the surface is strong and confident, but possibly even stronger than you are, or at least on equal terms in terms of power, but is also extremely kind and compassionate. But the two most important things that Luffy displays is his complete disregard for the idea that Hancock and her sisters are lesser because of the status of being former slaves. And that scene where she asks him, does he see her as less than now that they know that she's a slave? And his answer is no. And that doesn't really matter. He just hates the celestial dragons. And most importantly, Luffy is probably the first and only person that sees past her beauty and what she has to offer in reality, and into being able to see her real self. Now, of course, this hilariously manifests in Luffy seeing how horrible of a person she initially is and calls her out as annoying and snaps at her constantly for being a mean person, especially during the arena fight. Now, this upsets her at first, but this is the first time anyone has actually bothered to interact with the real Hancock and not the facade that she puts on to maintain her appearance of coldness, strength, and control, which often, women in real life have to contend with, because of the usual unfair higher standards that women are generally held to, especially when positions of power come up. And they can't just be as good as men, and often have to go beyond that to hold any sort of respect and authority often. And therefore, in combination with the knowledge that Luffy is not only stupid and brave enough to be able to stand up to her most feared and hated people, the celestial dragons, it's enough for her to finally release her mask and see a person she can actually let her guard down with and open her heart to. I mean, when you look at all of that's transpired, it'd be weirder and more illogical from a character development standpoint if she doesn't fall for Luffy, because it is such a very, unique situation for her that, given all the information and the traits that she's observed, I can easily see why Luffy is such an attractive person for Hancock. And can I just say that I think Hancock's crush on Luffy is so funny and cute too, because like I said, she doesn't necessarily change her core personality with anyone else. Like, she is still just as cold towards everyone, especially with other men, but how she'll turn a 180 towards Luffy and then turn right back is always hilarious to me. Especially if you ever watch the movie One Piece Stampede, it's definitely a highlight. Like, her in that movie is so funny when she shows up because of just how outrageously passionate she gets for Luffy. And definitely that's a movie you should wait to watch until you get to at least, I believe, the end of Dressrosa, or maybe even the beginning of Whole Cake Island. And right now, if those words mean nothing to you, that's fine. Just know that it's very far off if you want to stay away from spoilers, because that movie has a crap ton of spoilers for everything that happens up until that point. So particularly with characters. But when you do get to that point, I would watch that movie just to see Hancock. She's so funny in that movie. Anyways, getting back to the story, Hancock, now willing to grant any of Luffy's requests, does in fact choose to acquiesce to the Marine's request, and on the condition that they take her to Impel Down first. And this whole scene of Luffy hiding under Hancock's cloak while hugging her from behind is hilarious, especially how she tries to pass off Luffy's sort of unsightly bodily functions as her own in front of Momonga is hilarious. Also, when she releases the Marines from petrification, the fact that they resurrect yelling "Cock-sama" is too funny too. Yeah, that whole thing. I really love the comedy that Oda uses around Hancock. Now from this point on, it's pretty funny, and I enjoy it pretty much anytime Hancock's on screen. Now at the Marine HQ, we get an update from their side of the conflict with Sengoku. We learn that 6 out of the 7 Shichibukai have agreed to be present at Marineford. All except for the lone Shichibukai we have actually yet to meet in person, but curiously, it's Jinbei who's holding out, and has now also been imprisoned in Impel Down, which can't be a coincidence. And this was a very curious thing to hear, because for some reason, the way Yosaku introduced Jinbei, I always had it in my head that he was just a stronger, more evil version of Arlong, and figured he'd love the chance to basically kill humans. But then I thought maybe his fishman pride won't allow himself to be used by the humans, and that's why he's stuck in there. But I do remember I was fairly excited to meet the long-teased Jinbei once we got to Impel Down. Especially, we got to see the silhouette of him, and that looked really cool. But yeah, we end the episode on a cliffhanger of Garp visiting his grandson Ace in prison. And this has always got to be tough for Garp, seeing his 2 grandsons become infamous pirates. And it'll be interesting to see what this conversation will be like. We know that he's not necessarily, based on his interaction with Luffy, like obviously he's disappointed that Luffy didn't become a Marine, but it doesn't seem like he holds any particular animosity towards Luffy. He's just kind of like this kooky grandpa that has ridiculous amounts of power, but is also he still loves his grandson so much. And I think that's kind of why Garp is here, because he's probably genuinely concerned for Ace as well, being his grandfather and all. But yeah, it'll be interesting to see what Garp says. Unfortunately, in real time, this you don't actually get to see this conversation, at least in the anime, for another few more episodes. Obviously, in the manga, we could kind of skip ahead a little bit, but yeah, that goes a lot faster, because the catch-up for all the Straw Hats that we're about to go into, that happens a lot quicker, as you'll see. Or we've already kind of discussed it in the differences section. But in the manga, it went by a lot faster, so we got to see Garp and Ace's conversation much, much quicker. And so, yes, the next couple episodes, actually several episodes, we take a bit of a detour to examine what happened to the other Straw Hats and where they were sent off by Kuma. But before that, we get this insanely funny scene with Luffy and Hancock to kind of set this detour up. Luffy is having a nightmare reliving his nakama being taken away from him, and Hancock is there and wants to try and comfort Luffy, but doesn't quite know how. So she imagines this sort of romantic scenario, and I freaking die at this scene. It's so damn funny, because first off, we get to see Luffy act in a way that we could never imagine, and the fact that Toei goes as far as to interpret how Hancock sees Luffy from her perspective is too much. Like, I die laughing every time, because he's depicted as this like incredibly handsome guy that's drawn in sort of the typical romantic shoujo anime style. So shoujo, it means young girl in Japanese, which is sort of the female counterpart to shonen anime, which is what One Piece is. But if you go around and look at the art style of many shoujo anime and manga, it often has this very distinct and different art style all of its own. And we get to see Luffy kind of look in this sort of art style, and it's so funny. And this is what I'm talking about, how like anytime Hancock is with Luffy on screen is just hilarious because of the comedy that sort of juxtaposition brings. Anyways, then we jump in, and the first Straw Hat we get to see is Nami, as she's taken to some sort of small sky island, and she's helped by some Merlin-looking wizard. And I think the first thing that caught me off guard about this whole place was that there are other sky islands outside of Skypiea. And it seems like it should have been obvious, but for some reason, I don't know why, but I feel like Oda made me believe that there was only one. But then upon multiple rewatches, I think back to Skypiea, and it was explicitly said that there were other Sky Islands, even outside of Skypiea, during the Skypiea arc, as Enel was originally from another Sky Island called Burka. So basically what I'm saying is I'm an idiot for not realizing the fact that, and being surprised at another Sky Island being there, which, yeah, I don't know what I was thinking when I was first reading this, but this kind of took me completely off guard. I was like, huh, there are other Sky Islands. Now, of course, it's pretty well known that there are far more other Sky Islands, just even between these three that we've kind of met, or at least seen. Anyways, Nami freaks out, which is understandable, being in a strange man's house all of a sudden, but I feel kind of bad for this sweet old man who's just trying to help, ends up being like a victim of Nami's wrath. And Nami seems to have ended up kind of in the perfect place, as this island seems to be some kind of weather-based research Sky Island, and it's aptly named Witheria. And Nami immediately uses their unique items like the wind knot that can somehow produce gusts of wind by untying them quickly, and she pairs this with her climate tech to completely wipe out a strong storm. But it turns out she kind of messed up their chance to gather data from the storm. And yeah, it's interesting that Nami got sent exactly where she needed to be, really. Now, the next Straw Hat that we get to catch up with is Frankie, where we find him in a completely different environment from Nami, and seems to be some land-based winter island. And he happens upon this trio of an old man, a kid, and a cyborg dog, which already is like, huh, that's convenient. And just like Nami, he seems to have been sent to a very fitting place specific to him, the mechanical island Futureland, Baltimore. And I always can't help but think they're saying Baltimore, and it kind of becomes kind of funny in that regard. And yeah, in this whole section with Frankie is hilarious. First off, the way he sneezes, how he builds up the sneeze, and instead of actually sneezing, like saying achoo, he just yells, Frankie! And like, where did this even come from? Because it's so random. And I think this is the only time I've ever seen him do that. And yeah, that one always catches me off guard. But this is also a chance for us to kind of get to know Frankie a bit more, as I learned something new about him here. It seems like he's actually incredibly proud of his perverted traits and refuses to cover it up, which I respect how comfortable he is with himself. And yeah, this also sets up a joke later on towards the end of this episode as well. And speaking of the pervertedness, we get a bunch of rapid-fire wordplay with the word hentai or pervert, again, as per usual with Frankie. So let's start with a couple of translators' notes about the word hentai and tensai. So the old man explains that this island is where a genius was born, and genius in Japanese is tensai, which sounds a lot like the word hentai, which Frankie willingly mishears, but then because of the emphasis on the word once, Frankie freezes over and needs medical attention. The old man accidentally yells out the word hentai when he meant to say taihen. And I kid you not, I always bust out laughing at the way the old man just says this line. So taihen in Japanese is kind of like saying, oh no, or this is terrible. But if you notice, taihen is just hentai backwards. So tai and hen, when you reverse those, it becomes hen and tai, which is why he gets them mixed up. And there really isn't a great way to translate these. And so the replacements they have for these two jokes just don't, I feel like they don't really make any sense other than just mixing up words like degenerate and genius, and then also mixing up geek and god, which that one makes no sense to me in the context that they try and use it. And, you can't really blame them for that because, yeah, those are very Japanese specific wordplay. And yeah, I don't really expect them to make sense of that, but they do their best. But yeah, there's definitely a lot of things missing in translation for this particular joke. Now, when Frankie emerges from the surgery, this part probably got the hardest laugh out of me because, first off, I love that they brought back that whole joke of whatever beverage Frankie uses as fuel affects his personality. And with the doctors unable to get cola, they put Darjeeling tea, which I had never heard of up until this episode, but it's a tea that's from India. But the way Frankie says it's Darjeeling is in his proper speech. It's so damn funny. But the best part by far has got to be when the kid tries to show how much he liked the old Frankie and does the super pose for him. And there's this uncomfortably long silence and blank stare. Then Frankie, with a straight face and a very serious tone, just says, "Boy, aren't you ashamed of yourself?" And the kid barks like, You're one to talk," before Frankie even finishes his sentence. It's so funny. I absolutely love that scene. And yeah, this episode does leave us on a very interesting cliffhanger, as we find out that the genius that the old man was talking about was in fact Dr. Vegapunk, the famous scientist. Now, I had pretty much already guessed it. I'm sure most people, even before this reveal, that the doctor or the genius that he was talking about was Vegapunk. And yeah, this is interesting because we've heard Frankie talk about how he admires Dr. Vegapunk's sort of genius and his advancements of mechanical stuff. And so I think definitely we're going to see Frankie stumble upon Dr. Vegapunk's research and maybe include some upgrades on himself. At least that's what I was thinking at the time. Our third stop on our Straw Hat catch-up is Chopper, who's been caught in a giant bird's nest, but he can't really move because he just recently went into Monster Point last we saw him, and he kind of gets tossed around like a rag doll for a while, and then he falls like a crazy distance down onto the main island. And this island seems to be some wild island where these giant birds reign supreme. And unlike the first two, it's not quite as clear how this island will benefit Chopper, but perhaps it has something to do with sort of his animal side being able to maybe broker a peace between the two humans or something like that. But yeah, this is the only one of the first four that I don't quite understand what the purpose of Chopper was, why he was sent here. Now, moving on to the final one of at least these episodes, we get to Sanji. Now, Sanji's destination is strange, to say the least, and also can be quite problematic, but I don't think I will get too deep into that now and save that full discussion and breakdown about the island we see Sanji land on until we get the whole story and its purpose in the story. And I'm sure you can guess what I'm referring to, which is its depiction of trans women. We see Sanji land on an island that seems very fantasy-like with pink and bright colors and seemingly beautiful women chasing Sanji at first, which you'd think he loves, but for some reason he's running like hell as if his life depended on it. But it turns out to be an island full of trans women or men who are assigned male at birth but identify as women, or they're men who like cross-dressing. I think we can begin to see why he was sent here. To kind of possibly have him grow and mature his idea about women and how he sees and treats them. However, the way these women are depicted has always been a bit of a contentious thing from different parts of the community, saying it's a rather negative and stereotypical portrayal of trans people. And I can totally see that argument in some cases. It is true. The way the women in this one scene are, especially this one scene, that they're treated, they're seen as a threat and incredibly unappealing, to the point where some people have called Oda a homophobe, which I think is not the case. I don't think Oda is a homophobic person, and I think Oda is actually very open on his views about homosexuality and LGBTQ topics, albeit he is clumsy with his usage of them. And I can say that while he is a bit clumsy, it doesn't ever seem to be from a place of malice, I think it's just he's still learning. At least that's the way I am interpreting it. And you have to remember that while men cross-dressing as women isn't that strange in Japan because of it's been a staple in Japanese kabuki theater where men would often play the female parts. So Japan as a country is somewhat more open to that, but its political and social views are still very conservative on the topics of homosexuality and LGBTQ rights. And so, yeah, kind of looking at it from that standpoint, I think Oda is trying his best, despite being a little clumsy with it, if you kind of get my meaning in that regard. Despite this, Oda still tries his best for good representation, and we can already see that with characters like Bon Clay. Again, while he is designed and acts very stereotypically flamboyantly gay, his character is one that is very good deep down. He's a very good person, even though he started off as a villain. It's even sometimes hinted and alluded to the fact that Nami may in fact be lesbian or at least bi. Particularly, I'm referencing the moment when she came up against Khalifa on Enies Lobby, and after noticing how sexy Khalifa was, Nami kind of like, I don't know, she kind of jokingly says like she would want an assistant like her, and then makes like a startling realization about herself that maybe she questions her own taste. And so that scene, I always felt like maybe Nami is open to, all different lifestyles. Of course, there is way more nuance to this subject, but I can't really get into it without getting into spoilers, since we do see much more in terms of LGBTQ characters that Oda introduces from here on out, as well as in the next arc. And then we get to see more of Kamabaka Island and Sanji's time there throughout this whole, next 3 or so arcs. And so there is a lot more to this that I think deserves going into more deeper, but I can't do that until we get to those portions of the story. And it might not be until much later, after Marineford, when we actually do see everything, at least most of the things that we've seen with these islands. Also, the name Kamabaka is kind of a play on words as well. So Kama is short for Okama, or gay man, and Baka, some people might think it's like as in baka as in stupid, but the baka here is you have that slight intonation, so it's baka, not baka. And so that just means only or nothing but. And so really it's just like, because it's a shortening of the word bakkari, like something is it's only constitutes of this one thing. And so when you say kamabaka, it's really just saying only gays, as essentially what that the name of the island is referring to. But I think, yeah, it is worth discussing more about. But yeah, there are still too many spoilers to sort of get into it here. But I still did want to point out the problematic yet somewhat understandable point of view from this. But anyways, this kind of concludes these episodes, but there are a few more episodes before we get to the next arc, Impel Down. We still need to see what happened with Robin, Usopp, Brook, and Zoro in the next few episodes. But since we only have 2 episodes to cover, I will also be including a mini review of the Amazon Lily arc in the next podcast as well. So please look forward to that, or not, if you don't like the reviews. And yeah, it'll be interesting to see where the other 4 end up, because it seems like right now on the surface, Kuma has sent each Straw Hat to somewhere that they can actually learn and grow, which is interesting. First off, how does Kuma know where exactly they need to go to actually grow? Because it's not like he's that intimately aware intimately aware of what each Straw Hat's weakness or strengths are. So it's like, how did he know? Is that part of his ability? Or maybe that the question that he asked, like, where do you want to go on vacation? That's maybe the trigger of what helps him see what they need to do or where they need to go. It's very interesting. This is one thing that I've never figured out, how he knew this. But yeah, but we'll leave it at that. And yeah, if you enjoyed this, send me a like or comment. And if you want to join me on this journey of rewatching One Piece, please consider subscribing. Check out my Instagram at X account. God, I'll never get used to saying that. At Sunny Go Podcast, if you want updates of when I post new episodes or see some pictures of my manga collection. And yeah, as always, I wanted to thank you for taking the time to listen to my podcast. No spoiler section this episode, but stay safe out there, and I hope to see you on the next one. Bye!